Sure, here's a compelling introduction for your YouTube video story. It was a peaceful afternoon in the park. Parents laughed with their children, couples strolled hand in hand, and the sound of birds chirping filled the air. But for one father, a simple day out with his daughter was about to take a shocking turn. James, a loving father, had taken his little girl, Lily, to the park like he always did. He lifted her in his arms, spun her around, and she giggled, holding onto him tightly. To anyone watching, it was a beautiful moment between a father and his child. But not everyone saw it that way. A woman sitting on a nearby bench narrowed her eyes as she watched them. Her name was Karen. She didn't know James, but something about the scene didn't sit right with her. The girl was white, and the man holding her was black. That was enough for suspicion to creep into her mind. Instead of minding her own business, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I'm at the park, and there's a man here with a little girl. She looks scared. I think he might have kidnapped her," she told the dispatcher. Her voice was urgent, her mind convinced that she was doing the right thing. James had no idea what was coming. He was just enjoying time with his daughter when suddenly he heard a voice behind him. "Sir, step away from the child," an officer commanded. James turned around, confused, his heart pounding as he saw two officers walking toward him. One had his hand resting on his holster. Lily clung to her father, frightened by the sudden shift in energy. "What's going on?" James asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. Before the officers could answer, Karen stormed up, pointing a finger at him. "I saw everything." She was trying to get away from him. She insisted. James looked down at Lily, who was now on the verge of tears. He couldn't believe what was happening. People around them started to stare. His mind raced, trying to figure out how to prove what should have been obvious. And then, just as the officers were about to take action, Lily spoke up. Lily's little voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Daddy, what's happening?" she whimpered, gripping James's shirt tightly. Her big, innocent eyes darted between the officers and the angry woman. James bent down to comfort her, but before he could speak, one of the officers took a step closer. "Sir, we need you to back away from the child," he repeated, this time more firmly. James raised his hand slightly, his pulse racing. "This is my daughter," he said, his voice calm but filled with frustration. "There's no misunderstanding here. I'm her father." Karen scoffed. "Oh, really? Then why does she look scared? Why is she clinging to you like that?" She crossed her arms, certain that she had done the right thing by calling the police. Lily looked up at the woman, her face scrunching in confusion. "Who is she, Daddy?" she asked softly. James let out a slow breath, trying to control the anger bubbling inside him. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said, keeping his voice gentle for his daughter's sake. Then turning to the officers, he asked, "Do I really look like someone who would hurt his own child?" One of the officers hesitated. Something about James's tone, the way he held Lily, didn't match the picture Karen was trying to paint. The other officer, however, was still skeptical. "Do you have any proof that she's your daughter?" James clenched his jaw. "Yes, I have pictures on my phone. I have documents at home. But do I really need to prove that my own child is mine, just because a stranger thinks we don't look right together?" Karen huffed. "You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be," she snapped. "If you're really her father, then just prove it. Otherwise, let the officers handle it." People around them started whispering, some pulling out their phones to record. The weight of their stares pressed down on James. He could feel his daughter trembling in his arms, confused and scared. "Sir, we just need to verify," one of the officers said, though his voice had softened slightly. James sighed, reaching for his phone. But before he could show anything, Lily turned to the officers with tears in her eyes and said something that made everyone freeze. Lily clung to James even tighter, her little hands gripping his shirt as she turned to the officers. Her voice was shaky but clear. "Why are you being mean to my daddy?" she asked, her innocent words cutting through the tension. For a moment, there was silence. The officers exchanged glances, and even Karen hesitated, as if the weight of the child's words had caught her off guard. But she quickly shook it off. "Sweetheart, I know you're scared," she said, her tone dripping with forced concern. "But if you need help, you can tell us. You don't have to be afraid of him." James let out a slow breath, his patience wearing thin. "She's not afraid of me," he said firmly. "She's afraid because she doesn't understand why a stranger is accusing her father of something so ridiculous." Lily buried her face in James's chest. "I don't like this," she mumbled, her voice muffled. One of the officers crouched down, trying to approach her gently. "Hey, kidda, we just need to make sure everything is okay. Do you know this man?" Lily peeked out and frowned. "He's my daddy," she said, her voice full of certainty. "He makes me pancakes in the morning, and we have dance parties in the kitchen." She sniffled. "Can we go home now?" James felt a lump in his throat. He knew his daughter was trying to be brave, but this whole situation was terrifying for her. "You see," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "she's not in danger. She's with her father." Karen folded her arms. "Well, I still think it's suspicious," she muttered. "How do I know he didn't take her from someone else?" At that moment, another voice entered the conversation. "Excuse me, but what exactly is going on here?" Everyone turned to see a woman rushing toward them. She was out of breath, her face filled with concern. James felt a wave of relief. It was his wife, Emily, Lily's mother. Karen's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected this. The officers stood up straighter, sensing the shift in energy. Emily's gaze flickered between James, Lily, and the officers. Then she turned to Karen, her voice sharp. "Did you seriously call the police on my husband?" The tension in the air thickened. The truth was beginning to unravel, but the damage had already been done. Emily's sharp words hung in the air, and for the first time, Karen looked unsure of herself. The confidence she had just moments ago started to crack under the weight of reality. She glanced between James, Lily, and now Emily, Lily's mother, struggling to justify what she had done. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you are." "I'm Emily, Lily's mother," she said firmly, stepping beside James and placing a protective hand on their daughter's back. "And I want to know why my husband is being treated like a criminal in the middle of a park." Karen let out a nervous laugh, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was just trying to be cautious," she said quickly. "I thought the little girl was in danger. You can't be too careful these days." James shook his head in disbelief. "Cautious?" He repeated, his voice laced with frustration. "You didn't see a child in danger. You saw a black father with a white daughter, and that was enough for you to assume the worst." The bystanders had grown quiet, their attention fully locked onto the confrontation. Some looked at Karen with disapproval, while others continued filming, sensing that this moment was far from over. The officers exchanged looks, clearly realizing the situation was escalating into something much bigger than they had anticipated. One of them, the one who had seemed doubtful from the beginning, exhaled and looked at Karen. "Ma'am, did you actually witness anything that suggested this child was in distress? Did she call for help? Try to get away?" Karen hesitated. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her silence spoke volumes. Emily took a step closer. "You put my husband and daughter through this because of your own assumptions," she said, her voice shaking with anger. Do you have any idea how terrifying this was for Lily? For James? Karen's face flushed, and she crossed her arms defensively. I was just looking out for her, she mumbled, but her voice had lost its conviction. James let out a bitter laugh. If you really cared about her, you would have asked before calling the cops. Instead, you saw what you wanted to see. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Karen looked around, as if searching for someone to take her side, but the crowd wasn't on her side anymore. The officers were no longer focused on James. They were looking at Karen now. The moment was reaching its breaking point. But then, the officer who had been silent for most of the interaction finally spoke, and what he said made everyone's breath catch. The officer turned to Karen, his expression unreadable. Ma'am, do you realize that making a false report is a serious offense? Karen's face paled. False report, she stammered. I was just trying to help. The officer sighed, glancing at James and Emily before looking back at her. Help who? The child who never asked for help. The father who was doing absolutely nothing wrong. His voice was firm now, his patience wearing thin. We take every report seriously, but calling the police on a father simply because you think he doesn't look like his daughter isn't just irresponsible. It's dangerous. Karen's eyes darted around the growing crowd, her breathing quickening as the weight of the moment settled on her. She opened her mouth, maybe to defend herself, maybe to apologize, but before she could say anything, another voice called out from behind them. Excuse me, is there a problem here? Everyone turned to see an older woman walking toward them, her heels clicking against the pavement. She was dressed professionally, carrying a leather purse, and the moment Karen saw her, her entire body stiffened. James frowned, watching this sudden shift in Karen's demeanor. Who is that? He asked, his grip on Lily tightening slightly. Emily, just as confused, looked between Karen and the woman. But Karen's reaction said everything. She looked frozen, her usual confidence completely gone. The woman stopped beside the officers, her sharp eyes locking onto Karen. Karen, she said in a clipped tone. What exactly have you done this time? James and Emily exchanged glances. This time, Karen swallowed hard, her shoulders shrinking in as if she were a child being scolded. Mom, The woman held up a hand, cutting her off. No, don't speak. She turned to the officers. I apologize if my daughter has wasted your time. This isn't the first time she's made assumptions. A murmur went through the crowd. James's jaw clenched. So this is a pattern. The older woman sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Unfortunately, yes. She then looked at James and Emily with what seemed like genuine regret. I know an apology isn't enough, but I want you to know that I don't condone this. And I will personally make sure she understands the damage she's done. Karen looked horrified. Mom, you're embarrassing me, she whispered harshly. Her mother turned to her, eyes cold. No, Karen, you embarrassed yourself. The tension in the air was suffocating, but just as it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, one of the officers received a call on his radio. His entire posture changed as he listened, and when he looked up, his expression was serious. Sir, he said, turning back to James, we need to talk. Right now. James's heart pounded as the officer's expression turned serious. He instinctively held Lily closer, his mind racing. What is it? He asked, his voice steady but laced with tension. The officer hesitated for a brief second before speaking. We just got a report about a missing child matching your daughter's description. A stunned silence fell over the group. Emily's grip on James's arm tightened. That's impossible, she said quickly. Lily isn't missing. She's right here with us. Karen let out a small gasp, looking almost triumphant. I knew something was wrong. She blurted out. I told you. But before she could finish, the officer held up a hand to silence her. We received the report 15 minutes ago from a woman claiming her daughter was taken from this very park. James's head spun. That doesn't make any sense, he said. We've been here the whole time. Lily was never out of our sight. The officer's radio crackled again, and he turned slightly to respond. His face remained unreadable as he listened, but when he turned back to James and Emily, his expression softened. We've just confirmed it, he said. The report was a mistake. The missing girl was found with her mother on the other side of the park. Someone jumped to conclusions and called it in before checking. James exhaled sharply, relief washing over him. Emily shook her head, still trying to process the chaos of the past half hour. Karen, on the other hand, looked utterly humiliated. So she was never missing? She asked, her voice small. The officer turned to her, his expression hard. No, and this could have been avoided if you hadn't made reckless accusations. You wasted police resources and caused unnecessary distress for this family. Karen's mother let out a long sigh, rubbing her temples. Karen, I think it's time we left. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but no one was on her side anymore. With a final glance at the onlookers, she turned and walked away, her mother following close behind. James knelt down to Lily's level, brushing her curls out of her face. You okay, sweetheart? Lily nodded, then looked up at the officers. Can we go get ice cream now? Emily laughed softly, running a hand through her daughter's hair. Yes, baby. We're done here. As they walked away, James felt the weight of the moment settle in. People had doubted him just because of how he looked. It wasn't the first time, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But as he held his daughter close, he knew one thing for sure. He would never let anyone make her feel unsafe because of their own ignorance. The family disappeared into the crowd, leaving the park and the chaos behind. But the lesson of that day would stay with everyone who had witnessed it, a reminder that sometimes the biggest dangers weren't the ones we feared, but the ones we created ourselves. As James, Emily, and Lily walked away from the park, a sense of relief washed over them, but the weight of what had just happened still lingered. James squeezed Emily's hand, feeling grateful for her unwavering support. She had stood by him without hesitation, making it clear to everyone that he was not just Lily's father, but a loving and devoted one. Lily, blissfully unaware of the deeper tensions in the situation, skipped ahead, humming to herself. She was happy, excited for the ice cream she had been promised. Watching her, James felt a mix of emotions, love, protectiveness, and an ache deep in his chest. One day, he would have to explain to her why moments like this happened, why some people looked at their family and questioned it. But today wasn't that day. Today, she was just a little girl who wanted a treat. As they reached the ice cream shop, James noticed a couple of people from the park giving him small nods of support. It wasn't much, but it was something. A silent acknowledgement that they had seen what happened, that they knew it was wrong. He wondered if it would make them think twice the next time they witnessed something similar. Inside, as they waited in line, Emily turned to James. Are you okay? She asked softly. James sighed, running a hand over his face before nodding. Yeah, he said, I just hate that this keeps happening. That people assume the worst without even stopping to think. Emily reached for his hand. I know, she said. But today, the truth won. You won. James looked at her, then at Lily, who was now happily licking her ice cream cone, completely at peace. He let out a small chuckle. I guess that's all that matters, he said. As they sat together, enjoying their ice cream, the tension of the day slowly melted away. Life would go on, and they would face challenges again. But as long as they had each other, they would get through anything. And somewhere, Karen was probably reflecting on what had happened, realizing that her actions had real consequences. Whether she learned from them or not was up to her. For James, though, the most important thing was knowing that no matter what the world threw at him, his love for his daughter was stronger than any assumption, any prejudice, and any moment of ignorance. That was the only truth that mattered.